Welcome into a Tuesday edition of Hittin' Hard with Jon Chuckery. Today on the show, will you agree with what Travis Schlenk had to say? Talking to Jeff Schultz of The Athletic. I'm willing to move on from Collins, but it better be the right deal. And I'm going to rank my top 3 battles for the Falcons training camp coming up here next month. All of that today. It's Hittin' Hard with Jon Chuckery on Locked On Sports Atlanta.
This is Hittin' Hard with Jon Chuckery, part of Locked On Sports Atlanta. And it starts now.
Good Tuesday morning. We welcome you into Hittin' Hard with Jon Chuckery here on Locked On Sports Atlanta. We ask you to head over to youtube.com, put Locked On Sports Atlanta into your search browser, find us, hit the subscribe button, leave us a comment. And we are also free and available on all of your favorite podcast platforms, including Spotify, Odyssey. When you find us, leave us a 5-star review. Tell us what you think about the show. And of course, you can follow me on my personal Twitter page. That would be at JMCH316. We get ready for Thursday and the NBA draft for the Atlanta Hawks. And I've said, look, I wish that we had free agency and, the trades and all that would really happen before the draft so that the Hawks could get all of that figured out. And whether that's moving a draft pick or not, then they could go in, if they have a draft pick, go in and try to fit a specific need. But the way the NBA works, you have the draft first, and then we'll get into free agency. So Travis Schlenk spoke with Jeff Schultz of The Athletic here recently, and I thought he had some interesting comments because we've talked about on the show, the Hawks are involved in every trade in the NBA, right? Every Joe Bag of Donuts, every Mama Luke that's available out there, the Hawks are talked about as being in the mix. I mean, even for retired players, right? If Dwayne Wade was coming back into basketball, the Hawks would be involved in a trade that involves Dwayne Wade, right? That's where we're at with all this. Travis Schlenk said, quote, "We're the easy target." President of basketball operations for the Atlanta Hawks. Quote, "We're the easy target. Every rumor out there has the Hawks in it. It doesn't bother me. It's harder on the players than me. It's hard on the families. I talk to their agents, or if they're in town, I talk directly and tell them, look, don't pay attention to what you read. I'll let you know if something is real." And I understand that. And there is a lot of white background noise when it comes to the Atlanta Hawks and what they're going to do this offseason, because it was a disappointing year for the Hawks. And we've talked about on this show, which way is that pendulum going to swing? Is it going to swing back toward, okay, we're a legitimate contender in the Eastern Conference, or is it going to swing toward, maybe that was a fluke a couple of years ago and we're still building things and we're not quite there yet? And obviously, I, along with a lot of Hawks fans, and I think the Hawks too, want to, Tony Ressler specifically, want to swing that pendulum back toward, hey, we are a contender in the Eastern Conference. Now, when Travis Schlenk was talking about the roster and what they're going to do this year, this is one of the pointed quotes that he said, quote, "It's not going to be a major overhaul. I think some people have assumed some things based on some of my comments or Tony's comments after the season." Now, Tony refers to Tony Ressler, the majority owner of the Atlanta Hawks. And I understand that. I also think, though, that when you talk about adding a superstar level caliber player, that is a pretty big overhaul. A non-major overhaul to me means that we add a little piece here and we add a mid-level piece here and you add a mid-level exemption guy here. Adding a star is a major overhaul because most likely, and we'll talk about this, here in just a second, you're talking about you're either going to have to trade assets or max a guy out. That's a big overhaul, especially for this team who's going to talk about getting into luxury tax and things like that. So while I understand exactly what he means, that we're not going to trade 10 guys away, blow up the roster, and start all over, adding a star with all the money and a few assets given up, that is a major overhaul. If you're talking about giving up a Collins or a Hunter or this guy and a that guy, well, those have all been the key pieces that have been part of trying to get this thing on track. Now you're giving those up and, oh yeah, I got to pay a guy $35, $40 million just to be here. That is a big deal. And that's going to put your owner in the luxury tax. And if you do that, you better be ready to win right now. Now, Travis Schlenk went on to talk about the idea of where the Hawks are at in building a roster and things like that. Quote, "It's a lot easier to become a good team, a playoff team, than it is to become one that contends for a title. We feel we've become a competitive team, But now we have to take the next step, and those are difficult decisions. If you make a mistake in the draft, you can overcome that. It's a 2-year mistake. If you make a mistake in free agency or in a sign and trade, when you're giving somebody a 4-year, $150 million contract, that can be detrimental for a long time. And I agree wholeheartedly with this. Now, we've talked about being big and bold, and I'm for that. I'm for, to quote Ronald Reagan, now is not the time to use pastel colors. Now is the time to paint with big, bold colors. I'm all for that. But it also has to make sense from, am I going to get better with this guy? When people talk about DeAndre Ayton, for instance, okay, that's the name that we brought up. Why would I want DeAndre Ayton? Well, he's an up-and-coming. Okay, so let's look at this. DeAndre Ayton wants max money, 4 for $130. So I have to, Phoenix isn't letting him just walk away. He's the #1 overall pick from a few years ago. You think they're just giving him up for nothing? Of course not. Use your brain. They're not giving him up for nothing. So I have to sign him to a max deal, and I have to trade for him. So I give up guys that are already here that are trying to help me win to bring in a player that might not be a big upgrade from what I have. And if I can't include Capella into that deal, now I have to find a buyer or a trade partner for Capella, and I'm paying Ayton twice as much money. I'm paying him $40 million a year. Same thing with Gobert. Gobert might be better defensively than what Clint Capella is, but again, the stats at the end of the day are one guy's a 14-14 player, one guy's a 15-15 player. And he's a better defensive player, but my problem wasn't being I wasn't a good enough rim protector. My problem is all those guys that stand around the 3-point line can't guard anybody. I need a guy that when we have a back-to-back, and it's Philly in New York, or put whatever 2 teams on a Wednesday and Thursday night, that Trey's got a tweaked ankle, he needs a night to sit off. I've got a guy who can go out and get me 25 and 5 that night. And they need that kind of caliber of player. Well, those guys are dwindling. Remember, everybody was excited about Zach LaVine? He's going to sign. Why would Bradley Beal leave the Wizards? They're going to offer him the Bird Max. That's $50 million more guaranteed dollars. He's going to turn down $50 million to play with a mid-tier franchise. Are you guys insane? If the Suns are moving Ayton in a sign and trade, what does that tell you about a guy who is a core piece of a championship? The Suns are ready to win the NBA title, and they're going to lose one of their stars in a couple of years. What does it tell you about what kind of guy or player DeAndre Ayton is if the Suns say, yeah, we'll give him up in a sign and trade, and we'll let him go, we'll bring back some assets, but they're ready to win the NBA title now? What does that tell you? Doesn't that tell you something, that the guy who's the #1 overall pick, they'd be willing to let him go, that they're trying to build around with Booker and Paul and try to go make one more run, that they let him go? That should tell you something. There's a reason why a guy like that, that's a restricted free agent, would be allowed to leave a championship caliber organization after all the rumor of he can't get along with this guy. Doesn't that tell you something? That should tell you about where some of these guys are. And remember, people wanted Zion. Well, he's about to sign his max with the Pelicans. That pool of players who can make a big difference is shrinking rapidly. And I've said on here, I don't want to trade just to say we traded. I don't want to add a bunch of salary just to say, well, look, we added these guys. Are these guys going to be difference makers? When I look up in the standings and I go on to ESPN.com and click the NBA standings, are we going to be a better organization? Are we going to be a team that is ready to contend? Or are we going to say, well, we got the luxury tax, we spent a bunch of money, but what are we? These have to make sense. Now, when we come back, we're going to talk about John Collins, because he is running rampant in the trade and rumor and innuendo and speculation business. But it's got to make sense, even if I'm giving up a piece like that. We'll talk about that next. It's Jon Chuckery here. It's Hitting Hard on Locked On Sports Atlanta.